So, Murphy, as our newest member of Because That's What Heroes Do, we're going to start with you. What were some of your initial thoughts on Emissary?
Emissary, nice continuation from the mid-season of TNG. It's a good segue. Certainly a lot more fluid as a story than say Encounter at Farpoint, which is clunky, hard to get a grasp on. Yeah, it's a good story. It focuses very heavily on one character. Everybody else is pretty peripheral. I thought it was funny that when you look at the credits, you actually ROM for about 5 seconds, and he's only listed as Ferengi Pit Boss, which I thought was pretty good. Yeah, no, and it's a good story. It's a solid story. It gives you a good introduction to the series. Yeah, no, I've always enjoyed it a lot. There's something about it that's charming in a weird way. And of course, the marvelous DS9 color pattern of purple and bronze, which is just everywhere. Yeah, no, it's a good one. What were your thoughts?
Megan, how about you?
It was so fun to go back and watch the pilot again for the first time. I remember I've been telling you a little bit, Tom and Murphy, I think the story too, how my first watching of the pilot for the first time was one of my very early dates with my now spouse, where I was anxious about my inability to crochet as well as I had claimed I was able to.
Mm.
So getting to see it again without kind of that underlying romantic anxiety was really pleasant. But aside from that, it was hard to almost separate all the experiences we've had with these characters since then. But really high level, I thought that just starting off the episode right back there at Wolf 359, that really pivotal moment in the whole series, and then also for Sisko as an individual, was so good at pulling us right back into the story. And it almost reminded me of the beginning of Endgame when Hawkeye was shown his family dusted and just immediately sucking you right back into this world that you haven't been in for a while. So I thought that was such a beautiful choice. And then introducing all of the characters. Murphy, I think you're right. They were like, a lot of them were really like introduced quickly.
Yeah,
But
it's a very quick introduction.
so quick, but the introductions were so representative of who the characters would grow to be. Like, I think it more
Mhm.
so than in most pilots, they really captured the essences of the characters that they were going to be developing later on. So I thought
Yeah.
beautifully done. Tom, what did you think?
It was a lot more intense than I remembered. Megan and I did a deep dive into The Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2, and
Mhm.
Wolf 359.
Yeah.
And I thought that scene where Jennifer dies, obviously that was very poignant. But what I
Mhm.
got out of that was just how hated is Picard because he became Locutus of Bor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, we,
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
and so he was very, and I remembered he met Picard, and that meeting was even more intense than I had
Mhm.
remembered. I've thought about Wolf 359 a lot, and I even posited that that was a pivot point of all Star Trek, that those two episodes and that battle. And so it was able to recall that.
Yeah.
Um, Kira Nerys, boy, she is one angry woman, and
Mm.
Reason.
with
Yeah.
good reason. And it really drove home for me the often difficult transition that a rebel or rebellion leader has to make when they move into government and
Yeah.
administration.
Yeah.
And the skills that served her so well as a rebel may not serve her as well as an administrator. I really like your point about two things, Murphy. One was the how much we focused on Cisco, and also your point about Farpoint, because in reading, do some research for this episode, the screenwriters were people who had worked on the TNG series. They knew every inch and every word of every Bible,
Mhm.
and they were well versed. And it showed in this screenplay
Yeah.
because they hit more cylinders than Farpoint did. And I really thought that, I don't want to say professionalism, but their expertise and background in the Star Trek universe really showed true for me. So, what did you have for us, Murphy?
No, I agree with your point specifically to, first of all, with that scene with Cisco and Picard. That is a moment that we haven't really seen before. In TNG, Picard has his tense moments with people, but he's always this revered guy. When Cisco says to him, we met in battle, and the instant sort of stone face, his face just drops. And it's this progression also in TNG for a lot of things from that point in, it's the furtling of Picard. It's this realization that he is not fully the person that he wants to be anymore, that he has lost a piece of himself. And this comes into play. You see this in the right after Best of Both Worlds when he visits his brother in France, when he has that breakdown and he says to his brother, well, you don't know what they did to me. And I think you see this later on in First Contact too. You see him losing this. But yeah, it's definitely a different dynamic than we've seen in him before. And I also have to wonder, talking about Keira Nerys, I wonder, since originally Michelle Forbes was supposed to play Kira's role, and it was supposed to be Ensign Ro going to DS9, leaving TNG, doing that. I wonder what a difference her character would have been. Someone who had been tempered by experience in Starfleet, had been used to those protocols and been used to working with other races and working with Picard and having him as a mentor, what she would have been like as the Bajoran attaché to the station. Whereas instead, like you said, we get Kira and she has to struggle to transition into that role. I think it would have been interesting, but ultimately, I love the choice that they made to go with someone new and someone right out of the trenches, as it were, who 2 weeks ago was sitting in a cave in Decool province and is now pretty much secondhand in charge of a station. So yeah, no, it's very interesting. You're right. The writers did a really good job with that and really did a nice job of tying it into past TOS and the TNG Bible and stuff like that. Yeah.
I had to,
Megan,
when I
what
was
did
watching that initial conversation between Picard and Sisko, and so when Picard realizes where Sisko had been and what he had known about him, he didn't respond at all. He didn't say anything. And I was watching it. He walked away and then got back to the topic at hand. And I was wondering, was there anything he could have said then, or should have said to
I'm sorry, I
Sisko in
killed
that
your
moment?
wife?
Yeah,
Something of that kind. But it really made me think about, I think,
I wasn't
the
exactly
heartening.
myself in a day. Yeah.
I just thought it was an interesting moment because he looked, the word I wrote down for it was defeated. He
Yeah.
looks so much more defeated than you see him usually.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Megan, what did you think about as we move to the more spiritual aspect of the show where Sisko meets Kyle Paka and then is told about the orbs and what they might mean, and that he indeed is the emissary. Called, I will not serve. If elected, I will not move forward. How, and then he meets them. How did you find all of that sort of spiritual part, or was it just great science fiction for you?
I thought it was great science fiction, and I loved how they approach it spiritually because the context poor Sisko is in while this is happening. He's just been told by Picard that his only job is to unify Bajor. He's just been told by Kira the only way to unify Bajor is through the religion. Then he's told by the religious leader, you are now the emissary, the most important religious figure in the world. What's a guy to do?
But he doesn't know yet. I didn't even think Opaka fully understands where the role of emissary is. When was the last time anybody spoke directly with a prophet? She has this vague idea through text of the coming of the emissary and what it's going to be. But until he actually visits the Celestial Temple, I don't even think the prophets know what an emissary is going to be.
And commented how ironic it was that the emissary was going to be someone who didn't wish to be this.
Yeah.
I love how they treated the religion with so much seriousness. Because often a lot of the Federation is largely post-religion, and especially Earth is post-religion, and Bajor isn't. And it's treated really respectfully, never as superstition. They prove it's actually wormhole aliens. But I like the way they handle it. And the whole conversation with the prophets, everything that happened in the wormhole, I thought was a really profound way of looking at our experiences through time and the nature of linear time. I'm a fan. Tom, what did you think of it?
I love the discussions of time and the linear nature of time and the potential fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensions of time, and experiencing all facets of time at the same time. I thought that was a good 5 to 7 minutes of great science fiction writing. What about, I don't know if it's the businessman in me or I'm just innate capitalist, but they get through the wormhole and Sisko immediately says, we've just discovered the first stable wormhole. Do you know what this means? the three of us know what wormholes are. We've been living with wormholes for a long time. Do you
Mhm.
think that was realistic? Because that was as pivotal, pivot,
Pivotal.
pivoting pivotal part of the series as anything. Did that resonate with you guys, or is that just that's the way it is?
There's,
4,300.
th- there was a TNG episode that explores this premise where the Enterprise is called to this planet to oversee negotiations for the purchase and acquisition rights of transit to this stable wormhole. When the Ferengis show up and a bunch of other people show up and they're all doing their thing. And in the end, the wormhole collapses and the Ferengi get trapped, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it would be interesting to see what that would have been a distinct possibility. Bajor takes a claim to this wormhole, and maybe to boost their economy, they auction off transit rights. That could have been an avenue that they took. But I don't know. What is Sisko thinking about in terms of this is going to be great for exploration or this is going to be great for the economy? I'm not sure. I certainly I like the discussion, as you said, the discussion of time that he has in the middle. I had this idea that before Sisko sets up his own time loop by explaining time to the prophets. So they view time, he explains time and game, and they see time, linear time as a game, and then go back in time and set up the gates to the wormhole so that he can go through it, but that's that's a bit of a jump to conclusions.
I love the wormhole, the stable wormhole was a gift as well, I think. It was a gift from the prophets to Sisko because they obviously knew what his goals were to unite Bajor and to bring Bajor into the Federation, and giving Bajor a economic and scientific piece of leverage like that
Mm-hmm.
is probably the fastest and surest way to meet that goal. So
Yeah,
I
no Sisko, no prophets, right? Because if you see in the mirror universe, there are no prophets because Sisko is not there. There is no emissary to bring them back or to introduce them to Bajor, and they can go back to Bajor for the orbs. If Sisko isn't around, the prophets don't show up. It's really interesting. And Vedic Bareil says that later. Bajor has no, or mirror Vedic Bareil. Bajor has no gods on the other side of the mirror universe. So it is really interesting, his role both in them and their role to him.
How about the introduction of Chief?
Tom, you can go first on this
And
one.
Megan, I knew that was coming from you. So why
Yeah.
don't you take the lead on this one?
Oh gosh, you know how I feel about Chief O'Brien, and probably even, I don't know if we've ever gotten into how much admiration I have for Keiko, but that'll come later. I like the conversation he had with Picard, because there's this wonderful contrast, right, between the way that Picard and O'Brien were interacting, and it was friendly and it was compassionate, and they'd been through things together, and O'Brien knows Picard in a way that Sisko doesn't.
Yeah.
And I also feel like Picard was leaving O'Brien there, not representing him, but representing what Picard represents. And so looking at O'Brien in that way, and then the relationship that he builds with Sisko and the rest of the team over time, I thought was really interesting because Sisko and O'Brien got along really right away.
Mhm.
And so I think it bodes very well, but it's nice to see him. And I'm so glad he came to DS9. Just like I'm glad Worf will eventually be on DS9. I'm a big O'Brien fan.
Yeah, he definitely, Miles needs a haircut in the first episode, but so does everybody else. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to see Miles there, but like, where was everybody else? I didn't understand. No other TNG people came to say goodbye. I felt so bad for him. He's alone in transporter room 3, poor guy.
I always just thought of him as the direct descendant of Scotty
Mm.
and just absolutely loved him. The career enlisted man who actually makes everything work and always cool and calm under pressure.
Yeah.
With Keiko, that we'll get into all of that later. But yeah, if there's a beloved character on that show, I have to nominate Chief
Yeah, it's great.
for that. What about the introduction of Gul Dukat and the Cardassians?
Oh, I like how Gul Dukat comes in. He's like, this was my office a week ago, and Sisko sarcastically tells him to drop by whenever. And Gul Dukat, in all earnestness, does not get the sarcasm and thanks him. That's funny. He's a much tamer beast than he becomes. He's set up as a bit of a fall guy in that first episode. But
Because what he's talking about, it was like torn apart by the Cardassians before they left under Dukat's order. He's coming back and casually talking about the theft and the kidnapping, basically, of important religious relics. and almost assuming Sisko's going to want to get in on that action and have a scientific knowledge exchange of these stolen relics. I thought it's just maybe my opinion of it is a little colored by what he does later, but I thought like they set the Cardassians up as just primo villains
Yeah.
from minute one. And Ducat just, he slimes and oozes from place to
Mhm.
place and is so distasteful in a really strong and compelling way. I just, great villain.
It's also a little diplomatically insensitive that he just lets the Cardassians roam around and go to Quarks. If a Gallifrey warship showed up 2 weeks after the occupation in orbit of Bajor, it's a diplomatic incident when with a guy who's been there a day, just like, yeah, sure, go hang out at the bar, do what you want. And you just see the Cardassians hanging out playing Tonga. Like it's,
Megan, you may have actually answered my next question, but where do the Cardassians fit in our pantheon of villains? Because if we start with the Klingons, we do default to honor. If we start with the Romulans, we know they're liars, cheaters, and thieves, but that's what makes them so great and why they have an empire. The Borg, we haven't met the Jem'Hadar yet. Where do you assess the Cardassians? Or should they, because they change and morph at some point, but right now they're pretty villainous. Are they just slimy and sleazy? Reptilian even?
It's hard to find sympathy, especially at this point, at the beginning of the series. The occupying force that has recently been chased off is not a wildly sympathetic character class. But I think that desire for power and control and that feeling of rightness to be in power and have control, I think, I wonder if they even seem more villainous now than they might have when the show was originally airing because of that.
you can look at examples in TNG of the Cardassians, and they're definitely portrayed as villainous, but they lack the nefariousness of the Romulans in the early days and the brutality of the Klingons. They're definitely set up as villains, but unlike Romulus or like the Klingon homeworld, it's the Cardassians are also portrayed throughout the series as being remarkably artistic in weird ways. It's undeniably a fascist art, but they make a lot of references to music and Cardassian literature. At one point, I think Derek talks about something called the repeating epic and how it's the greatest form of classical Cardassian literature. And it's literally just the same story told over and over through different points of view, meant to drive home the duty to the state is everything.
Is that not he was very Soviet?
Yes, it is. They have a high emphasis on culture and being, but it's also your only existence should be to the state. That's your loyalty. Which is interesting. You don't see that a lot with the Klingons, who are tribal and warlike, and the Romulans, which are all about like treachery and deceit. A little with the this whole spying thing of the Romulans, but yeah, it's very much a like you owe your allegiance to them kind of thing, which is interesting. It's completely against the Bajoran ideal of individualism and we're going to take it to the streets and love of the prophets and stuff like that. Or I guess you could say that the Bajorans are also one note with being religious zealots. Who knows?
In terms of Easter eggs, for me, this entire show is one big Easter egg, probably by design, because I'm going to end with two questions. One, did it work for you? And now looking back or rewatching it, and I rewatched it again last night, but did it work as that transition from TNG to something else? Because clearly they were building on what had been created and they had to drag all of us Star Trek TNG fans along with them. Did all that work? And were there any other, you hit Ensign Rowe with Michelle Forbes, because I wondered about that, Murphy. How different would it have been? And she was such a dynamic character from TNG. But any other Easter eggs we haven't gotten to that you guys really struck you guys or even just enjoyed?
I want to put a little one out there for the introduction of Julian Bashir, the sleaziest skirt chaser that ever graduated Federation Medical School. And I mention it only because of all the character growth in all the Star Treks that have ever been or ever will be. I don't know if there's anyone who did a better job than Julian Bashir. And it was so fun to see him just being awful as an arrogant young grad, knowing what awaits him. And so I love that. And in terms of continuing the conversation, I think it did a great job because it did establish, it anchored us with kind of the pivotal moment of Wolf 359. And then there was a direct handover from Picard to Sisko, which I think was really elegantly done.
Yeah.
But they also set it up to be really strange and new. We've got a whole new type of transit through the universe. We've got main principal characters who are not Federation and a new environment than we've had in Star Trek before. So I think they did a good job of handing over the reins and setting up the new context for the show. I think it was beautifully done.
Murphy?
Yeah, I know. I agree. I think the transition was really nice. Biased because it's my favorite Star Trek, but I think a lot of it, this is, if Star Trek was conceived originally around Mary's idea of wagon train to the stars, right? This is Dodge City. This is Sisko was the sheriff and he has his posse and the action comes to that town and he's got to defend it. And that's a different animal. And I think that was in 93. I think there was a transition for a lot of people. I think that was hard to accept. Is why DS9 remains that kind of outlier, the sort of black sheep of Trek. It's still around a lot. And I think it's due to exceptional writing of just phenomenal storyline that just evolves. But that sort of week by week adventure, they try to do that in the first season. It works. And then they go start with the second season. They go more serialized. And that's where the series really comes into its own and starts to take shape. But it also makes it hard for people who aren't watching it week by week. It makes it a little inaccessible. No, that's fine because it's its own thing. But yeah, no, I think they did a great job. And I'm happy that they used a lot of stuff. And in fact, I watch New Trek now, and there are more subtle DS9 Easter eggs and bits of lore that are thrown in than almost any other series I can think of from back in the day. It's really interesting. I'm not sure why, but it's just such compelling writing that it's just so much to work with. Even if it's not with the popularity of TNG or something like Voyager or whatever. Yeah.
So I love your remarks on from the wagon train to the stars to Dodge City, because the final line between Dr. Bashir and Kieran Reese, where he says he wants to be on the frontier, he wants to practice frontier medicine, and she chastises him and says, well, this frontier is my home.
Yeah.
That's what everybody remembers. But I remember he wanted to be on the frontier. And so I, look at this through different lenses, and the moral flexibility you either need or can engage in when you're on the frontier can make for some really interesting questions. And I know we're going to explore them through the episodes that the three of us have selected. But I love that kind of component. I'm always fascinated when actors who perform in completely different genres changed that. Rene Auberjonois.
Oh,
did
yeah.
this.
Oh, boy.
He was a stand-up comedian.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who may not remember, he was the original Father Mulcahy
He was.
in the
And
MASH
in
movie.
the Mask movie. And he was a big
Yeah.
player in a lot of Altman films. He shows up in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and he shows up in a whole bunch of other stuff that Altman did over the years. And we see him without this makeup, but it still looks remarkably like him. Yeah. He's a fantastic actor.
And he obviously has a lot of growth to come as well. Sisko's either use or manipulation of Quark, I love that scene.
Oh,
I don't know if he intended to do that all along or it just came to him, but Quark is exactly the kind of person you want, the leader of the civilian population,
Yeah.
because everybody's going to come to Quarks,
Mm.
and they do. And the interplay between Odo and Quark, it's almost a game between them, which I really loved. One other thing that I'll pick up on in a later episode, which is when the Defiant appears.
Mm.
It turned out that Sisko had been one of the engineers on the original plans for the construction of the Defiant. What I had forgotten was when he came to Deep Space Nine, that was the assignment he was on. He took a 3-year hiatus
Mhm.
after Wolf 359 to essentially put himself back together.
Yep.
And that's where Star Trek sent him. And and the Defiant, as he reminds us, was designed originally to fight the Borg. And that's why it was so overpowered, so fast,
Yeah.
etc. And so I love that sort of tie-in as well. The episode absolutely worked for me. for all of the reasons that we've talked about on this
Yeah.
pod. But remember, they were trying to transition to something very different than perhaps what Gene Roddenberry had originally conceived of. And they had to bring us all along,
Hmm.
and they did. I guess we should go around for kind of final thoughts. Murphy, what were your final thoughts on these 2 episodes, which became The Emissary?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great way to jump into the series. It's like I said, it's a little more of a cohesive story than Encounter at Farpoint or um what the pilot for TOS was. I think it was the Cage, I believe, which
Right.
is leftovers from the previous pilot. Yeah. And even Voyager was good. But it was all over the place. But this really sets us up in a spot. This is the locale. This is the town. These are the people. They set up the Denorius Belt and they'll set up the Badlands. They're setting up this Western landscape. And it really comes together. And it's, just a fantastic cast, fantastic writing, and something completely new that just hadn't been tried before. And it's just amazing.
Megan?
I think my only other final thought is one thing we just didn't touch on too much yet is Sisko as dad, which is one of my favorite parts of DS9. And I love that they introduced Jake right away. And I love that they established that wonderful father-son relationship right off the bat. And watching that change and develop over time, not only is it wonderful to see, but it anchors us in their timeline so well, growing up with somebody.
Mhm.
And so I love that about it. And I'm so excited that we're doing this and having the opportunity
Yeah,
to dig
yes,
into
so am I.
DS9 again.
I'm going to end by shouting out to baseball, my favorite sport. I love the way this episode started with a baseball, and baseball's going to be with us the whole time. I have my own Willie Mays signed baseball, and so
Very
did
nice.
Captain Sisko. Guys, this has been a ton of fun for our premiere episode of this season because that's what heroes do. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Catch you next time.
As do I. Yes, lots of fun.